Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
In this video, we will explain about linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. I am Siska Putri Utami, student number 070.
I am Sofia Nurhanifa with student number 077.
I am Alvia Sofiana with student number 42.
I am Mariam Wolfa, student number 073. Hope you enjoy this video.
I'm Siska Putri Hutami, student number 070, and I'm going to talk about linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. So, over half the world's population is bilingual and many people are multilingual. They acquire a number of languages because they need them for different purposes in their everyday interaction. There are 6 linguistic varieties, and I will describe the 2 of them. The first is vernacular languages. It generally refers to a language which has not been standardized and which doesn't have official status. Vernacular are usually the first language learned by people in the multilingual communities, and they are often used for a relatively narrow range of informal functions. Example, children are talking with their friends using informal language from these places. That is the vernacular language that they use. There are 3 main components of vernacular languages. A vernacular is a non-codified or unstandardized. It refers to the most colloquial variety in the person's linguistic repertoire, and it's used to indicate that a language is used in informal everyday interactions without implying that it is appropriate. The next linguistic variety is standard language. Recognized as a prestigious variety or code by a community, generally is written and has undergone some degree of regularization or codification. Standard language is the most useful and widely used as an official language or the national language. Example, people in their places use standard language in their places. Like Indonesia, we use Bahasa Indonesia as the standard language.
Okay guys, here I will explain you about world Englishes. Okay, world Englishes. Firstly, I will explain about the definition of world Englishes. World Englishes refers to the English language as it is variously used throughout the world. It is the concept of the English language as a global means of communication in numerous dialects, and also the movement towards an international standard for the language. Sometimes international English and the related terms above refer to a desired standardization, for example, Standard English. However, there is no consensus on the path to this goal. Next, ENL or English as native language. Language of people born and raised in countries where English is historically the first language. The countries like United Kingdom, United States of America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And then the English as native language as traditional, cultural, and linguistic basis. Around 350 million ENL speakers around the world. Not one single variety. Differences in territories, for example, United Kingdom and United States. Norm, providing and spoken in the inner circle. Next to the ASL or ESL, English as second language. People living in territories like India, Tanzania, Malaysia, and Singapore, countries former colonized by British. And English gained importance in administration. English serves official purpose within the country in law, education, and government. Also, worldwide, around 350 million speakers. Norm, developing, and labeled as non-standard, illegitimate, interlanguage, bad, deviant, half-baked. Next to the EFL, English as Foreign Language. For speakers of EFL, English serves no purpose in our country. Historically learned for communication with ENL speakers. Nowadays, used for communication with other non-native speakers, norm dependent and used in expanding circle. For example of EFL is Indonesia. And then next to the Kachru's three concentric circles. The first is inner circle. Inner circle, the primary language, or we can call it the mother tongue, spoken English as norm providing. English language standards determined by English native language speakers. The countries of inner circle, for example, England, Australia, and Canada. Next to the second circle, it is outer. Outer as an official language or as an official English used in education, business, government. And then spoken English regarded as norm developing on standards. The countries of this circle, for example, Malaysia, Tanzania, India, and also Singapore. Next, in the third circle, it is expanding. Expanding, we can quote English as the second language. Spoken English regarded as norm performing, and then standards from inner and outer circles are performed or taken over, but no official status, therefore dependent on standards set by inner circle, belongs to countries which use English as a lingua francas. Language used between speakers whose native speakers are different. The example of the countries is China, and also Japan, and then Russia. According to Introduction to Sociolinguistics book by Janet Holmes in page 81, there is an exercise to criticize the concept of birth kachru. Let you check your book. Please check your 81 page. In exercise 3, the concept of inner, outer, and expanding circles of English presents some problems when we think about the way English is used on countries such as India and Singapore, where it is the first language of some people. Can you think of a better way of distinguishing between different varieties of English across the world? So let us see the answer. Over time, it has been recognized that the distinctions between the circles are very difficult to maintain using criterion of native versus non-native speakers. An alternative approach is to think of the circles as identifying people with different degrees of proficiency. Those in the inner circle are those with high or native-like proficiency, whether they are native speakers or not. And the outer and expanding circles represent decreasing levels of proficiency, usually reflecting a more limited range of functions and less frequent use. Another approach would focus on the range of functions English serves, from all functions for those in the inner circle through to a more limited range of functions as one moves out to the expanding circle. Yeah, that's all from me.
I'm Alfia Sofiana and I'm going to explain about lingua francas. Lingua francas is a language used for communication between people whose first language differ. In some countries, the most useful and widely used lingua franca is an official language or the national language. In some countries, the most useful and widely used lingua franca is an official language or the national language. Here, for example, in multilingual communities, lingua franca may eventually displace the vernaculars. A variety of other terms is the first, a threat language. The second is a contact language. The third is an international language, for example, English throughout the world. And the last is an auxiliary language.
Hello everyone, I'm Mariama Ulfa, student number 073. I want to talk about some special kinds of languages called Pidgins and Creoles. Pidgin and Creole are new languages that develop when speakers of different languages come into contact with each other and have a need to communicate. Many Pidgins and Creoles have arisen when colonial powers came into the contact with local people as they spread around the world. Let me go first with Pidgin languages. As I just mentioned before, the Pidgin languages have no native speakers. The languages that arise very suddenly, very quickly for functional communication, or when there is a need for communication in a certain situation, for example, for trade or for labor. Pidgin language is a short compromise between two or more languages or between multiple languages. Pidgin usually arises when a group of people is dominant over another group, and the less dominant group needs to learn to communicate with a more dominant group, but without any formal education. They adopt simplified languages based on the basic vocabulary of the dominant group language and based on the most basic grammar of their own native language. This happens most commonly in a situation of threats, slavery, or colonial context. Imagine the situation. An English colonial has a sugar plantation, and they bring over laborers from various different countries to the sugar plantation. And those people speak different languages. When they work together, they need to have a common language, so they try to adopt English. But since they do quickly, they just adopt the basic. And the resulting language is very simplified language, just using the basic vocabulary of English and a very non-English grammar. That is Pidgin language. When Pidgin first develop, they are typically restricted in use, meaning they are only used for certain purpose, for example on the jobs or for trades. But some Pidgin become extended Pidgin, meaning that they begin to be used for all phases of life, including social life, family life, and things like that. And they become a language in their own right. Even though they are not native languages, they are passed down from generation to generation as lingua francas of a much people who speak different native languages. Now about Creole languages. Creole language is a stable natural language that has developed from a Pidgin. Creole language starts as a Pidgin and becomes children's native language. So, Pidgin has no native speakers. They arise because of the need for a lingua franca. But if the language survives and becomes the native language of the next generation, that is known as a Creole language. For example, slaves from several different countries are working closely together on a plantation. But they have no common language, so they develop their pidgin and it quickly becomes their extended pidgin, the language they use for all everyday purposes. And then their children grow up in the environment with that pidgin language, and it becomes their native language.
This is the conclusion. Vernacular is the language used in daily communication, and most of them are not codified. Standard language are codified. It's an official language.
And World Englishes refers to the English language as it is variously used throughout the world. According to Bart's model, World English is divided into three concentric circles. Those are inner circle, and then outer circle, and the last one is expanding circle.
Lingua franca is a language used for communication between people whose first language differ. Pidgin is a language that has no native speakers, while Creole is a pidgin that becomes expanded and gained native speakers.
Okay, that's all from us. Thank you for watching and
Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.